this combination, kind of what features of Solr you can get just by configuring it in the user interface rather than having to write a single line of code, which I think probably a lot of people getting started, you might feel a little overwhelmed at all the code examples you've been seeing, and you just want an easy way to get started with Solr. So again, if you're starting a new project, hopefully this will really get you off the ground. I'm here in part because I'm a Drupal advocate. I work for Acquia because I love Drupal and open source, not the other way around. So I also love Solr because it's an open source project. And to me, the combination of those two is really an easy and powerful way to make great websites. So if you don't know about Drupal, I'm going to step back a little bit and give you some background. So Drupal is somewhere in the unity between web application framework and CMS. Some people call it a social publishing platform. That little guy in the middle there is the Drupalcon. That's our mascot. So Drupal does a lot of social interaction between users. So you can do blogs, you can do forums, you can have users tag their content. It can also be more like a traditional content management system. You can provide RSS feeds, consume RSS feeds, you can categorize your content. And with Drupal 7, it actually includes built-in support for RDFA. So you can emit RDFA, and that actually can help your site become searchable, become consumed by other machines. Drupal also includes support to be used as an API endpoint. So people actually use Drupal sites not as a website at all, but as actually the back end for something like a mobile app or for a Flash app or something totally separate from Drupal itself. So why is having good search important, especially with using Drupal? It's important because Drupal has dynamic content. So users come to the site, or administrators come to the site, editors come to the site, and they add new content all the time. That's what Drupal is good for. And when users are adding content to your site, you can't think ahead of time and decide what the navigation scheme is going to be. You don't know, which forum section is going to be created dynamically. You don't know, which bloggers are going to be blogging a lot, which are going to be popular. So really, having this kind of dynamic content means you need dynamic navigation. And for me, that's sort of synonymous with having an effective search tool. In particular, by combining with Solr, you get faceted search. And what that means is users will tend to go in and they'll search for a very general keyword. And they won't find what they're looking for in the first page of results. So they kind of get a dead end because they're like, well, I'm not going to page through 20 pages of results to find the one thing I'm looking for. Instead, by giving them facets, and I'll show you what that means if you don't know already, you can filter down and apply restrictions to that search. So it's the same keyword, but with additional restrictions. That helps users find what they're looking for, helps them avoid dead ends, and they can kind of back up. They can remove filters also. So they filter down too narrow, they didn't find it, they can back up and try again. Of course, Solr is great for keyword searches in general. It's also great because it's fast. And in particular with Drupal, it's great because it takes load off your database. So Drupal is a database-backed application, as most web CMSs now are. And to give you an example of why that's important, so the Drupal project has Drupal.org, which is a huge community website that runs on Drupal, of course. So up to a couple of years ago, we used Drupal's own built-in keyword search, which runs a database query. And it was taking 10, 20 seconds, even more, for simple search to come back. And if more than a couple users did that at the same time, it would crash the site. Now, this is a site with 100,000 users, right? So the probability that was going to happen was pretty high. So it got so bad that they had to turn off search altogether for a while. And then they adopted Apache Solr with the Drupal integration module I'm going to be talking about, the earlier version of it. And now we have tremendously more content. We have like 1 million documents, and searches are like sub-second. There's no load on the database from it. It's been very reliable. So this is kind of, you won't see that difference when you have 100 pages in your site, but as you get to the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, it becomes really critical to shift the load of doing searches off your database, because databases are just not good at it. So this might all sound great, and I just want to kind of sell you on the easy part. So in order to do that, I prepared a demo so that you can see just basically going from nothing to enabling this Drupal module that provides the integration to turning on facets, making a search work is really very straightforward. I mean, obviously, I practiced this demo, right? So, you know, it's going to take 5 minutes. It would take you 15 minutes, all right? But it's still very easy. And hopefully, this will give you a little context as I'm talking through the rest of the sort of more back-end features of what you can actually accomplish just by clicking through the user interface. So what I've done is you can see here's the conference site, and I made a copy of it. So I copied all the sessions, all the speaker bios, and saved them as individual pieces of content and categorize them, for example, by the day, categorize them by which company. And so if I go to another window here, I'm logged in to the same site. What I'm going to do is just go and enable in this grouping called Search Toolkit the Apache Solr integration modules and a faceting module. And here's basically the one click, as promised. And that's done. So the integration is ready to go. So if I go to the configuration page, you see that Drupal is ready to start indexing content. If I go to the settings page, it's already connecting to the Solr server just because I'm running on localhost, and it knows that sort of default Jetty setting. So it's very easy to get started. I'm going to index the content. I'll just reload the page so I get the right thing. And you'll see, so 76 documents are in the index. So you're basically ready to start searching, just like that. But what I want to do is turn on some facets. So the documents have metadata, these different fields. And so basically, I just have to go in this facet interface and click which of these I want to have enabled for searches. So I'm picking the company, the day of the session, and the content type. And Drupal helpfully tells us that since we've enabled the facets, we have to go to the blocks administration page. So Drupal has this concept of blocks, which tend to fall in the sidebars or the peripheral regions of the site to provide added functionality. So I'm just going to drag these blocks into place, basically in the sidebar. And I'm going to put them in the order I want visually. Click Save. And basically, so now I'm set to go, and you'll see I'm going to use as my test keyword the word search, just because basically every piece of content on the site has it. And voila, so we get keyword search results. We also have Drupal's built-in search still running here. So that's using the node module. And that basically gives us the same results in terms of keywords, but doesn't give us these facets. So over on the side here, you see that there are facet blocks. So we can basically filter by clicking on these. And we also have the option to go right in and configure them further. And I'm configuring one for company as an OR facet. So that's kind of an advanced feature where instead of filtering down, you filter up. So if I select one facet, I can then select another and expand my search. Yeah, so my thought is, okay, well, if I'm looking for presentations by one company, I might be interested in presentations by 3 companies. I want to select all 3 of those and not just limit myself to one in that particular case. So I'm going to sort of back up here. I'm going to filter by session content. So that's my first facet. I'm going to filter by the day of the conference. So today, the second day. And finally, let's say I want to see talks by Global Computer Enterprises and Etsy, which I just saw. And so there it is. So there's we started with a very generic keyword. We got a lot of results. Now we're able to filter it down and find exactly the results we want. So beyond that, the Drupal integration provides access to other advanced features. So here is the page we've been using. We also have more like this blocks. So if you know anything about the more like this handler, it gives you content recommendation. And I'm just going to do a little configuration on this to say I only want to match against other session content or against session content, and that I only want to show this block on session content. So it's basically when I'm looking at a session, I want to find similar sessions. And I'll enable the block just using this other editing interface. Okay, so now if I go back to my search result, I click on a session, you'll see in the sidebar, I now get a content recommendation block. It'll show me other sessions similar to the sessions I'm looking at. So you can imagine if you have a large amount of content on your shelf, this can really help your users find the things that are relevant to them. Again, this is the power of Solr. This is all Solr doing the hard work, but it's already built for you. You don't have to figure out the more like this handler API, which isn't hard, but it's going to take you several days to get this right. So it's already built for you. And that's the sort of thing, I want as your takeaway, this combination of Drupal, which is a fabulous and very flexible CMS, with Solr, already has this integration built, will get you started much more quickly in your next project. So Drupal has also a lot of great features built in terms of administration. So it has a concept of users and roles. That's sort of baked in throughout. And in particular, each role has very granular access controls. So you can basically click on or off different permissions for each user role. That lets you very easily define, for example, a normal authenticated user versus an editor versus a site administrator versus something else, marketing, right? So you can also configure user behavior, whether people can freely register or whether they have to verify their email address. A lot of these, again, sort of oriented towards more social sites, but you can lock it down if you have a corporate site where only defined users are allowed to register. What's even more important is that Drupal core is sort of the official project, but Drupal has a large community, and that community contributes additional modules. So like the module I'm talking about here is the Apache Solr search integration module. There are, for the current version of Drupal, over 4,000 contributed modules. So every one of those modules is basically an integration similar. It might be a very small integration with some API. It might be some new added functionality. But you basically have this huge wealth of pre-written code. So if you have a project, you say, I need to do something, our answer in the Drupal community is, there's a module for that. It's already written. Go find it, turn it on, and maybe your problem is solved. So all these modules, all the Drupal core are all free. They're all GPL. You don't have to pay any licensing fees. And there's a huge active community supporting them. Drupal is written in PHP, which some people cringe at, especially here at a Java conference. But it makes for really easy customization. And one of the reasons we have so many modules is that Drupal core is basically built with the idea in mind that modules are allowed to change things. So modules basically get the opportunity to alter, to change, to reset what Drupal core or what other modules are doing. And that way, in terms of project management, you don't have to patch, you don't have to modify Drupal core, you don't have to modify a module that someone else is maintaining. You can just write a very small module yourself, tweak the behavior, and get the result you want. And that helps in terms of maintenance, that you can distinguish your custom code, your very small module that's specific to your site, from the other modules that other people are maintaining and that you're pulling kind of from an upstream source. So just to give you a sense of the scale of Drupal community users, so the Apache Solr search integration module itself has approximately 10,000 sites that are actively report using it. So Drupal has a mechanism, if you enable automatic update reporting, Drupal will also call back to Drupal.org and say, hey, these are the modules I'm using. And we use that just to kind of gauge how popular the different modules are, how much interest they have in the community. So think about your next project. You want to be writing 100% custom code, or would you rather be part of a community of 10,000 people who might be fixing the same bugs, finding the same bugs before you do, and are willing to collaborate with you when you find a problem? So this is just, again, Drupal is very adaptive, very flexible. So really, you can make Drupal look like whatever you want, any of these faces. That can be Drupal on your site. Okay, so that was a big pitch for Drupal. Let me go a little more into the technical detail, because that's why we're here. So I'm going to give you some terminology that's sort of Drupal, not necessarily specific, but you need to understand to orient to what we're doing in the module. So Drupal has a concept of entities, which are really content, but they can also be data, sort of data objects. It's a very generic notion. But mostly as you start to work with Drupal, you'll see people talk about nodes. And nodes, again, a horribly overused term in computer science, but in Drupal, those are sort of the basic user-entered content. So if there's a blog post, a forum topic, anything like that, that's just a top-level piece of content, that's a node. But the entity system is really extensible. It can be used to represent any kind of different data. So we can have within nodes as an entity, we can have different types of nodes. Each of those different types of nodes can store different kinds of data. And those data fields, now this might sound scary. You might say, hey, I don't want to get into having to code up custom data, having to understand the system. Well, in fact, this is all configurable through the user interface. So you can add custom data fields in the user interface. Drupal core ships with a lot of sort of basic ones, text fields, number fields. If you need something more specific, you need a date field, you need a phone number with validation, you need something else. For most of those, there's already modules out there, so you just, again, pull the module down, enable it, and you get a sort of custom data field with validation, maybe with a specific input formatter, without any programming being required. And this is, it's not, it takes a little getting used to looking at these administration screens, but really it's pretty easy. So this is all it takes to add basically a new data field to a content type in Drupal, is you see where it says add new field, right? So you pick a name for the field, and you select what kind of data it's holding, and you select basically the input widget. If there's more than one option, hit go, that's it, right? So Drupal takes care of all the work of setting up the database to store the data. When you edit that content, it takes care of all the work of presenting it on the editing form. It takes care of all the work of saving to the database. This is, again, a much quicker way to get started on a project rather than starting sort of from a more raw framework. Drupal also is well known for its strong sort of content categorization capabilities. So it comes with a taxonomy module, and you can define multiple vocabularies. A lot of Drupal modules integrate with taxonomy. So for example, they use taxonomy for access control. So you label something as private, and there's a module that looks for that tag on the content and hides it from certain roles of users. Similarly, you could use it to control the appearance of your content. You tag the content red. You can actually, through Drupal, work and make that content look red. And again, this is all sort of very standard built in, that you can have sort of a free tagging option, or you can define flat or hierarchical vocabularies and make your users pick from a controlled vocabulary. One of the reasons I want to talk about, or I'm sort of emphasizing this content classification and taxonomy, is that taxonomy makes for great facets, right? So if you categorize your content, and in the example I showed you, I was showing you by days. So it's day 1, it's day 2, or it's a training. So those were taxonomy categories for the content. And then that automatically appeared as facets, and I was able to automatically drill down and find the day I wanted. So you don't have to think about it as colors or animal types. It can really be anything where you have an enumerated list of values can be taxonomy. And just to show you that I'm not sort of making up the power of this combination, this is sort of just a quick overview of some of the many sites that are using Drupal and Apache Solr already. So this is by no means complete, but for example, if you want to search for Barbie on Mattel's site, or if you want to search the government site about restoring the Gulf after the oil spill, or you want to search EFF, those are all Drupal sites. They're already using Apache Solr. They're already integrating using one of the versions of the module I'm talking about. If you decide to go this route, and I hope you will, one of the advantages is Drupal has already solved a lot of the integration challenges. And the one that I want to talk about in some more detail, and that I think is really hard and challenging, and most people probably don't realize it, is indexing your content. Keeping track of the content, figuring out when it's been updated, when it needs to go back to the index, and replace the document that's already in the index. That's actually turns out to be one of the more difficult things, and when you start out, you might really not give it any thought at all. I've already shown you that you can get faceting out of the box. There's also a sorting you can enable. So if you want to sort by date, you want to sort by author name, you want to sort by the title, all those things are available easily. Also the highlighting of the content. Again, these are all features built into Solr, but Drupal already has the integration to understand the results of Solr and present it in a sane way to your users. You also get integration with more like this, which I showed you, and with a spell check handler. So Drupal already has a built-in option. You just click, I want to spell check my results. It's really not spell check per se. It's does something sound like this and more common in the index, right? But it gives you suggestions. Did you really mean to type this when you type this because there's more results that match it? Finally, one other thing that people worry about is access control. So when you have a search index, when you've built an application, how do you control which users can see which search results? So this is a problem that we basically already solved. So Drupal has a content access system. So there's a bunch of different modules, and I mentioned ones that integrate with taxonomy. So you tag the piece of content as being, let's say, private. So only certain logged in users with certain roles can view that content. Well, clearly you don't want the other users to be able to see it in their search results. So if you enable the access module that we include, all the relevant metadata gets indexed together with your documents in Solr, and behind the scenes, filters are added to every query so that the content that users aren't supposed to see is filtered out. So again, this isn't going to solve 100% of use cases. There's some more interesting ones. One I wrote a blog post on a particular case near me where there's a school that said, well, if you're on campus, you can access the content, and if you're off campus, you can't. Right? So that doesn't fit in this model at all. And you can imagine but you starting from here, it was very easy to write an IP-based content access filter. So that you would, again, index in each document, is it accessible on campus or off campus, look up the IP address of the user, and behind the scenes within Drupal add a filter so you restrict the content based on where their IP address originates. So I talked already about more like this. Again, I mean, this is, I think one of the things at the end, hopefully I'll have plenty of time for questions, and I have the demo set on my laptop, so if anyone wants more detail, hopefully you'll save in-depth questions then, and we can dive in a little bit if anyone wants to see how this configures. But the MLT handler has a lot of options. As I showed you in that demo, a lot of those are already available just to sort of click, select, and off you go. Okay, so let's talk about indexing. So Drupal module has basically a built-in indexing pipeline, if you want to call it that. And this is sort of a general schematic of how that works. So I talked about Drupal content as nodes. So basically how this pipeline works is that we have sort of a list of things that need to be indexed. We load those objects out of Drupal, and it gets all those dynamic data fields. We then pass that data into different Drupal functions that process it. That gives us another PHP object, which we could call a document. In fact, you can make multiple document objects from one entity. And a use case where we've seen that is, for example, people wanted to index every single comment as a separate document. So you might have the original piece of content, it has 10 comments. So you end up with actually 11 documents going into your index. Most people don't want to do that, but that's sort of the use case where you might split it up. And then this document object basically knows how to convert itself into XML. And once you have XML, you send it to the Solr server, and it goes into your index. And each entity basically has a unique ID. If you've set up Solr, generally you want to set a unique ID field. So obviously, as you're going through this process, as you re-index, it'll overwrite the document already in the index for that corresponding entity. Let me go back here. So I just want to point out some of the sorts of types of metadata. Again, the type of content, sort of normalizing it here, giving the title field is normalized to be the label. The node ID, NID, is the entity ID, and the content type is this term we call bundle, which I have no idea why, but that's just what we call it. So those sorts of metadata are going into the index as separate fields. And I just want to get a return to the fact that Drupal then knows about these fields that it's indexed, and it will actually look in the index and say, hey, what are the appropriate things for me to provide facets? So I've indexed them as separate fields, and then Drupal can see that they're available, and we can facet on them. So again, content types, taxonomy, authors, date range facets are built in. So if you want to do ranges of dates for when your content was posted, and in general, anything that's sort of like a discrete list of values. So taxonomy is a special case, but those data fields you can, again, configure like a select list of numbers, a select list of text values. All those things will automatically get sent into the index as separate fields, and you can just check that box, turn on the facet block, and they're available to go. So I just mentioned that you could basically, when you got this entity, it's passed through a bunch of Drupal functions before you get to the document. So this is one of the places where you can get Drupal to adapt to your needs. So if you have some particular business need, you need to add more data to the document. You need to remove some data from the document. You need to modify it. You can write a very small Drupal module, more or less, 5 lines of PHP will let you add or remove a field to that document before it goes into the index. And in Drupal, we talk about hooks as being, it's basically a callback. It matches a certain pattern, and at a certain part of the Drupal page cycle, functions matching that pattern will get called. So when we're in the indexing cycle, if you write a module and you name your function module name Apache Solr index document build, this is, again, when you're building the document, you'll get the document object itself you can modify. You'll get the original entity. You get some other data. And so you can, again, set, remove, change, do whatever you want to get the data in the index the way you need it. Similarly, Drupal has a theme layer, which basically controls the rendering of the output. So there are similar hooks, and then there are ways to interact with the theme system so you can modify the way the output is displayed. If you look around the web, you can see some great examples of this. I'm not really like a front-end person. I'm a back-end person, so I'm not going to talk too much about this. But again, if you need to reformat, you need to, and this is often a case where people want to add extra data to the document because they want to display it in final search results. So, again, this is sort of a cycle. You can add it, and then you can modify the way the results are displayed to show your custom data. I mentioned before that sort of this indexing cycle and knowing when to re-index something is one of the hard challenges. And for Drupal, we generally do sort of a batch-based indexing. So we have a set of functions that we call cron functions, and generally these are kicked off by something like a real Unix cron job, so it's on a timer, every 5 minutes, every 15 minutes. And then we use a specialized database tracking table, and that lets us automatically mark content to be re-indexed when it gets changed. And some more advanced use I'm not going to really talk about is you could actually use the same system to send subsets of your content to multiple indexes. So the system would work to actually track, an unlimited number of different indexes, subsets of your content, and whenever something is changed, it gets sent again wherever it needs to go. Part of why this problem is challenging, at least in Drupal, is that we use a lot of ID-based reference fields. So for internally, the author of a piece of content is represented by a numeric ID, right? And a lot of systems are like this, right? So it's not that the user's name per se is stored with the content. It's just that reference, that ID. So within the module, we track when users update their names. So if a user updates their name, we have to go through and mark all the nodes authored by that user to be re-indexed, because when the content's rendered, often the user's name is there. It should be available as a keyword. It should be correct. And it should be correct when you're searching, and it should be correct in the search results. So sort of how do we do that? What's the trick here is we have a table. We basically, just anytime content is changed, we mark this column that says changed and set it to a new timestamp. We basically just record the latest timestamp, the latest ID we used. And next time we go through this cron cycle, we just pick up all the newest ones, or up to some limit. And that system, is a little counterintuitive. People often think that at first that they want to use like a real queue and put things out and pull them back in. But I said the advantage of this is that we can actually do indexing to multiple indexes if we need to using the system. We also have a status and bundle column here, which corresponds to the content type. What that means is we can filter, for example, by content type and say, you know what, we're going to exclude all the speaker bio content. That's not going to go to the index at all. And the status column lets us keep track of when things get published or unpublished, which I'll come back to in a minute. Again, I sort of talked about this with users. We have the same issue with taxonomy, that taxonomy administrator goes in and changes grapefruit to citrus fruit. We have a Drupal function that is looking for those changes to terms. It knows how to find all the content tagged with that term, mark it for reindexing, you get the right results. Last piece is sort of workflow. So Drupal has a sort of simple published and unpublished editorial workflow. And often when you're unpublishing something, it's because you want to get it off the site right away. So if someone starts spamming your site, you want to unpublish that content. You want to get it out of your search index as fast as possible. So you don't want to wait the 5, 10, 15 minutes for the next batch indexing run to remove it. So the module will send a delete query right away to Solr. But we use this tracking table also sort of as a fallback mechanism. So imagine your Solr server is down. This is a test I've done and made sure it works. So your Solr server is down. You unpublish the content. Oh no, your delete query just failed. What happens? So in fact, we check for a discrepancy between the content itself being unpublished and our tracking table, and we know that on the next batch index we have to delete it. And we're going to keep trying that and keep trying on every batch index to delete it until we finally succeed and we mark it or remove it from our tracking table. So this kind of notion of robustness, of being able to handle indexing when the server goes down. Those are these are our sort of hairy challenges that we have solved for you already. Other solved things using this is we're using dismax queries or edismax. So that means it's very easy for you to search for keywords across multiple fields in your documents. And within the Drupal interface, you can actually pick and select which of the text fields you want to search for keywords. You can also select how to boost them. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with boosting with dismax, but basically just says if I match in this field, it has a score, extra score, multiply the score by 10. If it matches this field, it's just multiplied by 1. This is all sort of enabled through the configuration files that we send with the module. So we have a schema.xml that comes with the module, a solrconfig.xml. So basically, we've spent a lot of time already figuring out the Solr configuration to integrate with the website. And in particular, in the schema.xml, it has a lot of dynamic field definitions. So there's dynamic data fields. We know how to map into a field name that goes into Solr that maps to the right data type. So there's a lot of work we've done in having that system of naming, of mapping fields, and knowing what type they are. So you basically don't have to do any work to get that to to index into search. If you want to dive deeper, I'll just mention briefly that we sort of have an object-oriented approach to how we prepare and send queries to Solr. So again, if you write a module, you can implement a function that looks like this, Apache Solr query prepare. And within that, you can basically set parameters to be set to Solr. You can examine the parameters that are there, and in the end, we can actually just use this object and send the search off. When we trigger that, that will actually construct the Solr URL, contact the server, get the search result back. So this is all, again, you might imagine you want to customize it, but really you can, adding or removing a parameter here is much easier than writing that full integration from scratch where you have to think about sending to the server and handling the result. Again, a pitch for sort of this wealth of modules. I'll come back to some of these if anyone's interested, but there's an attachments module where you can use Tika or Solr Cell to extract the content of attached documents and index those. We have a system that lets you search across multiple websites. So you can index multiple sites into one Solr index, and then you can restrict the search to be a single site search or a cross-site search, which is great if you have something like a portal that should lead you into multiple sites. We have integration with organic groups, which is something that a lot of intranet sites use. So this basically has groups of users that form groups, kind of around topics or departments. And you can, if you want, also index users. So if you want to index your users, your user profiles, let people search across those. There's integration with e-commerce, so people are already doing work there. If you want to, set up an online store and use Solr. So these are all, again, built already. They may not be 100% perfect for your use case, but they're going to get you, 95% of the way there without you doing any work at all. So to wrap up, Drupal and Apache Solr are great. That's the take-home message. I work for Acquia. If you can't find the support you need in the Drupal community, and there's a lot of support out there, we provide enterprise support. So we're happy to provide sort of that next level if you actually need, some SLA, you need to call someone in the middle of the night. That's the kind of thing we handle. We also actually provide hosted Solr. So if you sign up for a support subscription, we will provide a Solr index also that will integrate with your Drupal site. So hopefully I answered all the questions I started out with. If not, please raise your hand. There are other PHP integration tools. This is just a quick list. These slides will be up, so you can get them if you want. I'll just give you a hint. If you're writing a PHP integration, use the JSON format, not PHP serialized. It's not really safe. And just in general, Acquia is hiring. If you like this kind of stuff, please come talk to me. Here's some more resources, just links to the modules, links to past video, and some other places to have discussion. Yep? So the question was about multiple parent taxonomy. Drupal supports it. I don't think we have any way to render it. I mean, you know, you can't really do a single listing. So I think there may be sort of a preferred parent. Trying to remember, or we may just render it as flat if you have multiple parents. I mean, certainly. So one of the things that should work is when we index taxonomy, we index all the parent terms if it's hierarchical. So you can match all the way up the hierarchy. I think it's just more the rendering is going to be tricky for multi-parent. Okay, and time is up, so thank you all for your attention and questions.